I'm a mother. I have five adult kids, but I was also a freelance writer and author in the 1990s. I worked as a ghostwriter, a magazine editor, and a freelance writer. And during that time, as I was raising my own kids, I discovered that a lot of parents who homeschooled, I homeschooled my children, did not have access to quality writing materials. Most of the methods that we are all familiar with as adults who attended school are oriented towards teaching writing in a very linear, sequential way, as though the mechanics or the tactics of writing, the skills like spelling, punctuation, typing, cursive, format, as though those are the central elements of the writing experience. But what I learned by working in the professional field, and especially growing up around a professional writer, my mother was the author of over 70 books. Writing is about self expression and it originates inside a body, even before that child can read or write. And so I've developed a method and a variety of tactics informed by other professional writers that really works for children. It helps them establish for themselves that their author's voice already lives in their bodies, and we are merely teaching them the transcription tools to effectively get it out of their bodies for other people to read. So when we started with this understanding, it was like a revolution for children. Suddenly we had kids who said they had hated writing for decades. Suddenly they're writing. Suddenly they feel free. We have small children who can't even read or handwrite yet, telling their parents, write this down, jot this down, because they're in touch with the feeling of being an author as separate from whether or not they can spell the word accommodate correctly. So that was really the origin story of my company, which is Brave Writer. We started in January of the year 2000. We've taught more than 250,000 families. We've served families in 191 countries, and we've developed a whole product line. So growing Brave Writers is the curriculum that a lot of parents use to teach writing to their kids. Even if they don't homeschool, you can use it with your children. Help My Kid Hates Writing is more of a book. It's my pedagogy. It does have some writing instruction in it, but it's also an argument for changing the way we approach writing instruction, both at home and in schools. And because it's written by me, it's got anecdotes, it's got illustrations, it's got humor. It's meant to be an enjoyable read. It's not a textbook. I like to talk about them as myths. So, the first myth about writing is that you have to write every day. That is not true. To be a writer, it's important to engage with writing every day. Some days that means reading. Some days that means researching. Some days that just means rereading your own work over and over to make sure that the sound of the sentences still works. So when I'm teaching kids, they are always surprised to find out that taking breaks from the physical act of generating from scratch is actually essential to growth as a writer. So that would be my number one. Number two, when we are talking about writing, we want to actually define what we mean. And in the Brave Writer model, we say that the cornerstone of writing is the authentic voice that lives inside the body. And the other skill is this transcription skill, whether you handwrite or type or use voice to text. It is the capacity to get your words into a digestible format for other people to read. That skill is behind your fluency in writing voice. Most kids by age 5 are absolutely fluent speakers. They have sophisticated sentence syntax, good vocabulary, but that's about the time they're just starting to learn to read. So when we tell kids, you have to write it, and you're 7 years old, you are not going to capture the beauty of their language. You're going to get stilted, short, easy to spell and handwrite sentences, what I call dumbing down the content to match their transcription skill. So, what we want to do early on with children is catch them in the act of self expression. You have a child who's talking to you, you're standing at the sink, you're maybe washing a dish, and your child starts telling you about how the dog chased a squirrel in the backyard. That is a moment to stop what you're doing, grab a random sheet of paper, the back of an envelope, and without saying a word, start transcribing their exact story just as they're talking to you. Most kids are shocked. They're like, Mom, Dad, what are you doing? And your response at that point should be, this is so good. I don't want to forget it, so I'm writing it down. Your child often will keep talking. Some kids kind of square their shoulders and go for 10 minutes, but your job is to catch as much of it as you can. At dinner that night, I want you to pull that sheet of paper back out and say, Franny was telling me about how Rocky was chasing a squirrel. I was afraid I was going to forget it, so I wrote it down. And then read it back to the family. This practice is one we call Jot It Down in our company. And basically, what we're doing is we're helping kids experience themselves as authors, that the words that usually disappear into the air, if captured in writing, can be remembered and read aloud or read again. And once kids make that connection, the transcription takes its rightful place. It's something to learn to do, but it's not a gatekeeper of writing. Critical thinking is such an interesting phrase because for most people, when they hear it, they think it's being good at criticizing somebody else's argument, right? We hear something we don't agree with, and we're like, I am so good at showing them the holes in their understanding. But the way that I define critical thinking is self awareness. It's being able to do what I call the academic selfie. You take the camera lens that's facing out and you flip it around and examine your own bias, your own thinking, your own culture and community, your own language, your own educational level. You actually start critical thinking with self awareness, not with figuring out the other person's flawed argument. And so part of what I do in my book, Raising Critical Thinkers, is I offer basically hundreds of questions organized in very many different categories of understanding. But these questions are designed to provoke reflection. Most of us spend a lot of energy in what I call gotcha politics, right? We're like, well, if you say this, why are you doing that? And we act as though we are the source of all logic. But if you could get behind the eyes of a person who's different than you and you inhabited their body and had had their experiences, their language, their culture, their relationships, their education, if you had had all the same things that they had, you would see the world exactly as they do. And that is equally true for you. So the beginning of critical thinking is recognizing that we are all just the product of multiple factors. And the only way that we can expand into rising above just being at the effect of all that stuff is first to name it in ourselves and then to grant to another person that they too have an internal logic, a logic that holds up inside of them. The way that we then grow so that everybody expands to include more data, more information, more experience, more encounters is to deliberately make ourselves uncomfortable, to put ourselves in positions to hear information we've already rejected or that we're nervous about. And I know for me personally, that has always felt like a crisis. If I remember there was an issue, I won't say what it is because that will automatically make your audience take a stand. But I remember there was an issue that I was quite active about at an activist level. And I was reading along one day and I read a blog post that said that my position was the immoral one and the other side had the moral position. And it was the first time I'd ever really considered that the other side thought they held a moral position. I just thought that they held that position in spite of it being immoral. I was young, I was 39 or 40. And so I went to the library and I thought, you know what? I've actually never read the position held by the people from those people. I've only ever heard this is what they believe from the people who agree with me. I went on a 2-year search to read information that was representing the side I didn't hold by the side that held it. And it fundamentally altered how I understood that issue for the rest of my life. It didn't mean that I had to give up everything I believed. What it meant was I had to expand to include a whole set of factors I hadn't even considered. And it also made me aware that the two sides weren't even talking about the same issue. They were both defending and protecting different interests. And so I think critical thinking is the willingness to be made uncomfortable, to ask questions about why you even hold the views you hold, and why other people, people who might even be good, decent people, see the world differently than you. That's really the foundation. So, for most kids, like I said, we have to start with the idea that their own thoughts already have value. They're not trying to guess what lives in the mind and the imagination of a teacher or a parent. They're supposed to turn inward and discover what they have to say, no matter how incomplete. In Brave Writer, when we teach students in our online writing classes, one of our favorite questions to ask a student is, tell me more about. So let's say your child wrote something like, roller coasters are awesome. I really love them. I want to ride them every weekend. And you're like, this is not good writing. Where's the description? The description is missing because for a student to write about roller coasters, the topic is so huge and they are instantly flooded with too much information. So they use what we call label words, words that simply cover this gold mine, this treasure chest of good language and good ideas. So what we do in Brave Writer is we slow it down. We let them self-express. We call this free writing. You just write whatever comes to mind. You don't worry about spelling or punctuation. You just get it out, maybe in 2 or 3 minutes at a time. And then we go back a day later, not the same day, and we say things like, tell me more about awesome. When you're thinking about a roller coaster being awesome, which part comes to mind first? The speed, the loop-de-loops, the loud clacking of the, wooden roller coaster? Like, let's start with this word awesome. How many ways can we pull more detail out of that experience? Kids love to say more. What they don't like is not enough detail, vague, passive voice. That's the typical note from a teacher, which just shuts a child down. Or they might say, you misspelled the word coaster. And the adult who's reading the writing didn't even pause to say, what a great topic. I bet you know a lot about roller coasters. I want to hear more about that. We're so quick to move into what they're not doing that the child who has a lot to say is shut down before they get the chance to say it. So the foundation of Help My Kid Hates Writing is starting with first valuing the child and all that they have to express. And then secondly, and I've never seen a chapter like this in a writing book, I have a chapter called Healing the Damaged Writer in You, because pretty much every adult I talk to has at least one horror story of writing instruction that was ego deflating or even traumatizing. I tell one story in the book of this man I met at a business networking event that I was at. 69 years old, has built multiple 8-figure businesses in his life. So then he turns to me, what's your business? I'm like, homeschool writing. I felt like this tiny little person compared to him. And he said, oh, tell me more about that. So I explained that when we teach writing, we enroll the parent and the student in the class because the parent needs instruction on how to support the writer that the child is. If we just teach the child, the parent is going to wreck it. And he made the comment back, I wish I had had that when I was a kid. And I said, well, tell me more about that. And then he started telling me a story of a time in 5th grade when he wrote a 3-page narrative, shared it with his best friend, shared it with his mom. They both told him it was great. He turned it in. The teacher gave him an A for the story content, but an F for grammar. He could not even hear the A for content. He was so humiliated by the F that for the rest of his adult life, he used a secretary or someone standing at a whiteboard to write what he says because he was too nervous to make a mistake in public at a board meeting, in an email, in a letter. And I said, well, you know what? It didn't have to be that way. And he started crying. The man was 69 years old, fully successful businessman, still dealing with shame from feeling completely misunderstood and not seen by his teacher, not empowered. I have countless stories like this from adults. And weirdly, those are often the adults that want to be even stricter because they're trying to spare their children the pain they experienced at the hands of harmful teachers. So my book is meant to undo all of that. In fact, one of our practices is weekly free writing, where you set the timer for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and the parent and kids all write freely at the same time. You just keep the pencil moving. You write whatever comes to mind, even things like, this is stupid. I can't think of anything to say. I'm stuck. Why is my mom making me do this? Like, whatever is in your brain, you write it down. But I always say the parent has to write too, that it's a democracy of writing in the family. Because once the parent starts to get in touch with all of those painful feelings and also the nerves around writing, their capacity for empathy just grows instantly. And the kids see the parent taking that risk and it helps them take the risk. But to your point, what is the most gratifying aspect of this? For me, it is the self confidence in the young kid writers. When they discover that writing is an asset that they can use for their own enjoyment, discovery, connection. We have this myth that kids hate writing. But the fact is, the second the internet threw open its doors, more kids were writing for an audience than in the history of humankind. Kids love writing. They had Tumblr, they had blogs, they had live journals, MySpace, Facebook, all the social media, all the videos they're writing and designing for TikTok. Kids love communication. What they don't like is evaluation. And the way teachers evaluate, they evaluate as though they are not readers. Our fundamental task as adults, whether we are teachers or parents, is to read a child's writing like a reader. Respond to the content. I see where you're going. I'm in suspense. This feels really interesting. I laughed in this moment. This word that you chose for description is so apt. When we recognize the writer, not the person failing at mechanics, the writer grows and they want to grow. So that's my favorite part of this work.